you, students? This is grade 12 economics lesson provided by the Ministry of Education of Ethiopia. And this is the 5th lesson of Unit 1, which is about the fundamental concepts of macroeconomics. And more specifically, we are going to see the school of thoughts in macroeconomic analysis. First, let's revise the previous lesson, which was about unemployment and the balance of payment. A person is unemployed if he or she is not employed and has been looking for a job or is on temporary layoff. The balance of payment is a summary of the transactions that a country makes with the rest of the world. When we come across to the today's lesson, which is about the school of thoughts in macroeconomic analysis, we are going to see different schools of thought in macroeconomic analysis called the classical school of thought, the neoclassical school of thought, the Keynesian school of thought, the monetarist, the neoclassical, and the new Keynesians. Let's start with the classical school of thought, and the main contributors of the classical school of thought were Adam Smith, David Hume, David Ricardo, Jean-Baptiste Say, who is familiar with his thought called supply creates its own demand, and John Stuart Mill, Nat Wicksell, and Irving Fisher. And Adam Smith takes the major contribution in the classical school of thoughts. According to classical thinking, given flexible prices, the short-term fluctuations in economic activity would rather be quick and they would adjust back to full employment. So there is no need to intervene into the market by the government. And it focused on economic growth and economic freedom, advocating laissez-faire. That means let's leave individuals to do what they wanted to do, and in the belief in free competition. It is a hands-off policy approach. That means there is no need of government intervention in the markets. The demand and supply of goods and services can correct the market failures. For example, falling prices will eliminate the surplus and the economy will return to a full employment level of GDP. Suppose this is the market demand curve and this is the market supply curve. If there is an excess of the market supply over market demand, there is surplus, and if there is surplus, there is a downward pressure in prices of goods and services. And if there is downward pressure in price of goods and services, then the demand for goods and service will increase, and then it will return to in its equilibrium position. Conversely, if there is an excess of market demand over market supply, there is shortage, and if there is shortage, there is an upward pressure in prices, and if there is a rise in price, then there is a fall in the demand for goods and services, then it will restore at its equilibrium position. So, by falling prices, the market can correct the surplus, and by increasing prices, the market can correct the shortage. According to the classical school of thoughts, fiscal policy is useless in affecting employment and outputs. Fiscal policy is deliberate fixation of government expenditure and its revenue so as to achieve a certain objective. So, through the expansionary and contractionary fiscal policies, government cannot alter or change the expected goal to achieve in an economy. Expansionary fiscal policy is applied when the economy is in depression or recession. In order to boost aggregate demand and improve the expansion of the economy, then the expansionary fiscal policy is expected to increase government expenditure and reduce its revenue or tax. But according to the classical school of thoughts, they suggest that expansionary fiscal policy would only cause inflation. That means if there is an increase in government expenditure, it will lead to more buying and it leads to demand pull inflation rather than increasing the GDP. So the expansionary fiscal policy cannot expand the economy, rather it causes inflation. Increasing government spending will lead to a higher rate of interest if there's a rise in government spending. And if there's a rise in government spending, government borrows money from the domestic banking sector. And when government borrows from the banking sector, then the bank's ability to borrow money, offer money for the public will decline. Hence, they will increase their interest rate, and these interest rates will reduce investment. This effect is called the crowd out effect in economics. Monetary policy has no effects on the real sphere of the economy, and it only leads to a higher price level. Monetary policy is a deliberate manipulation of the money supply so as to achieve a certain economic objective. The expansionary fiscal policy would only cause inflation rather than increase the GDP. And when we see the demand side and supply side policies, demand side policies merely affect the interest rates and or the price level in the market. But the supply side policies affect the real wage, employment, and outputs in an economy. Supply siders like Arthur Laffer and Robert Mundell are the major contributors of the supply side policies. And supply siders despise government intervention in the markets and emphasize the distorting effects of taxation. So there is no need of government intervention in the markets. The supply siders policy advice is to cut tax rates to stimulate the economy. These supply siders suggest that by reducing the tax, then government can increase its revenue or taxes. This is accomplished when government reduces taxes, then the supply of goods and services will increase, and if there is a rise in the supply of goods and services, then the volume of tax that is subjected for the government will increase. So by cutting tax rates, government can increase its revenue or taxes. They argue that there is no need to cut government spending because the tax cut will pay for itself. Hence, there is no need to restrain public spending on defense, for example, while having an excuse to substantially cut the tax rates. The second school of thought in macroeconomics are the neoclassicals, and the main contributors are Leon Warras, Alfred Marshall, Wilfred Pareto. The second school of thoughts in macroeconomics are the neoclassicals, and the main contributors are Leon Warras, Alfred Marshall, Wilfredo Pareto, and he's familiar with his Pareto efficiency. And they closely follow the findings of the classical school, but emphasize the limitation of some of the classical doctrines, notably that of the laissez-faire. So the neoclassicals are an extension from the classical school of thoughts. The neoclassicals make use of the concept of marginal utility. Marginal utility is the additional satisfaction that a consumer derives from additional unit consumption of a commodity, and they accept mathematical economics as one method of presentation, like investment function, production function, saving function, and the consumption functions. In the long run, the economy will fluctuate around its potential GDP and its natural rate of unemployment. The potential GDP is the GDP that the economy can produce by employing all the available resources efficiently. The natural rate of unemployment is unemployment that is caused by frictional unemployment and structural unemployment. The two building blocks of neoclassical economics are that the potential GDP determines the economic size and weight, and price will adjust in a flexible manner so that the economy will adjust back to its potential GDP level of output. So the key policy implication is that the government should focus more on long-term growth and on controlling inflation than on worrying about the recession or cyclical unemployment. And that means the market can correct the recession and the cyclical unemployment using the demand and supply forces. The third school of thought in macroeconomics are the Keynesian school of thought, and the major contributors are John Maynard Keynes and his colleagues. And the Keynesian prescribed active fiscal policy to alleviate weak aggregate demand. The major factor that contributed for the emergence of the Keynesian school of thought was the Great Depression. And the Great Depression was caused by overproduction, and this overproduction or surplus production leads to deficiency in aggregate demand. So, if there is deficiency in aggregate demand, by increasing aggregate demand, then government can stimulate the economy. This is the key point of the Keynesian school of thought in macroeconomics. And this is accomplished by active fiscal policy. And the fiscal policy is the deliberate manipulation of government expenditure and its revenue so as to achieve a certain economic objective. When we see the assumptions of the Keynesian school of thought, they focus on aggregate demand. By increasing the aggregate demand, we can alleviate the deficiency in aggregate demand and stimulate the economy. The other assumption is the focus of Keynesian economics was on explaining why and offering a policy prescriptions for minimizing their effects. The additional government spending will stimulate aggregate demand and hence employment and outputs. If there is deficiency in aggregate demand, then by increasing government spending and by cutting tax, government can stimulate the economy. For example, increasing in government spending means increasing in government spending in expansion of development projects such as highways, dams, and railways. And if there is higher spending in these development projects, people earn income, and when their income increases, then their demand for goods and services increases. And if there is a rise in the demand for goods and services, then there is increase in productivity by the producers. By doing so, government can stimulate the economy according to the Keynesian school of thought. The other means of stimulating the economy according to the Keynesians is by reducing tax. If there is a reduction in tax, then there is a fall in price of goods and services. And if there is a fall in the price of goods and services, then there is a rise in the demand for goods and services. This increase in demand for goods and services will increase productivity of producers. Recession emerges from two key building blocks according to the Keynesian school of thought. First, aggregate demand is not always automatically high enough to provide firms with an incentive to hire enough workers to reach full employment. And the second one is the macroeconomic may adjust only slowly to shifts in aggregate demand because of sticky waste and prices. Sticky waste means waste are not flexible due to labor contracts or different reasons. The wastes are sticky, or they are not flexible, or they are permanent for a long period of time. And similarly, and the price are sticky, that means there is no change in price due to some other factors. According to Keynes, monetary policy is of little help as the additional money will simply absorbed by investors with no noticeable effect on the interest rates. According to the Keynesian school of thought, the fiscal policy will work well, and the additional government spending will stimulate the aggregate demand and hence employment and outputs. The fourth school of thoughts in macroeconomics are the monetarists, and the monetarist view is represented by Milton Friedman and his colleagues. And the monetarist assumption tells us by increasing the money supply or by reducing the money supply in an economy, then government or the economies can achieve their objectives. Let's see the assumptions. First, it is monetary policy and not fiscal policy that addresses the macroeconomic problems. That means we can avoid macroeconomic problems such as inflation, unemployment, budget deficit, balance of payments deficit, and the likes by increasing the money or by reducing the money in an economy rather than government expenditure and government revenue. Since they assumed the interest sensitivity of investment to be very high, fiscal policy leads to only to strong crowding out of private investment according to the monetarists. As you learned earlier, the Keynesians planned to expand the economy when it is in depression or recession by increasing government spending. But this government spending is mostly accomplished by borrowing from the banking sector. And if there is borrowing from the banking sector, then the bank's ability to offer credit for the private sector will decline, which in turn reduces the gross domestic private investment, what economists call the crowd out effect. So, monetarists suggest that this active fiscal policy or increasing government spending will lead to the crowd out effect rather than stimulating the economy. Hence, the monetary policy is best to improve the macroeconomy or to alleviate macroeconomic problems. The central bank should follow constant growth rule for some monetary aggregate and not tinker with monetary policy to influence aggregate demand and employment. Fiscal policy under monetarist assumptions is unable to influence employment and output. Rather, the monetary policy can influence the employment and the level of output in an economy. The monetarist assumptions imply that monetary policy has real effects, and the policymaker may therefore be tempted to use a monetary expansion to combat unemployment. That means by increasing the money supply in an economy, then it can create employment opportunities, and by doing so, it can reduce the level of unemployment in an economy. The fifth school of thought in macroeconomics are the Neoclassicals, and the major contributors are Robert Lucas, Thomas Sargent, Robert Barrow, Edward Prescott. They are the natural successors of the classical economists, and they stress more on the mathematical techniques to apply the macroeconomic functions. The Neoclassical supports the classical ideas such as flexible prices and wages, the rational expectations, the efficiency of the market and full employment. Flexible prices means the market can adjust or correct using the prices, or simply using the flexible prices, the market can control the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And the wage rates in the rational expectation hypothesis. And this is rational expectation hypothesis is people's expectation about their future consumption, about their future saving, about the future price and future investment. The efficiency of the market and full employment. All observable fluctuations in the economy are due to rational agents responding to the incentives as they observe them, not due to nominal rigidities. Nominal rigidities means the prices of goods and services are sticky, or the wage rates are sticky. There is no change in the price level or there is no change in the wage level. The last school of thought is the New Keynesian, and the major contributors of the New Keynesian were George Akerlof, Edmund Phelps, John B. Taylor, Stanley Fischer, Oliver Blanchard, Gregory Mankiw. Gregory Mankiw is one of the living legend in economics and the founder or the contributor of the New Keynesian school of thought in economics. And the New Keynesians are the natural successors of the Keynesian economists. According to the New Keynesians, markets may not be as perfect as the classical economists suggest, and they accepted the rational expectation hypothesis. This rational expectation hypothesis is people's expectation about future prices, people expectation about future income, people expectation about future saving, consumption and investments, and the existence of the nominal rigidities. And the nominal rigidities are occurred due to stickiness of wage rates and the price level. That means the price levels are not flexible or the wage rates are not flexible. Such rigidities invalidate the policy ineffectiveness proportion of the new classical economists. Hence, the New Keynesians argue for government to stabilize the economy even under the rational expectation hypothesis. The most recent wave of New Keynesian macroeconomics is more micro-based. That means it is mainly focused on the level of economy at the individual level, at the industry level, and the price levels around specific markets. The predominance of imperfect competition, coordination failures, and the credit restrictions are stressed under the New Keynesian school of thought in macroeconomy studies. Students, let me give you exercises. The first question is, which one of the following school of thoughts implied a hands-off policy approach? A, the classical, B, the neoclassical, C, the Keynesian, D, the monetarist. The second question is, for classical economists, the demand side policies merely affect A, employment, B, output, C, interest rate and or the price level, D, real wage. Question number 3. What was the central element of the policy advice from supply-siders like Arthur Laffer? A, increase government spending, B, implement strict monetary controls, C, encourage deficit spending, D, cut tax rates to stimulate the economy. The fourth question is, what is the primary solution proposed by Keynesian economics to combat recessions? A, increasing monetary policy, B, increasing government spending, C, reducing government intervention, D, promoting international trade. Welcome back, students. Let's do the questions together now. The first question is, which one of the following school of thoughts implied a hands-off policy approach? And this hands-off policy approach was proposed by the classical school of thoughts. And the hands-off policy approach indicates that there is no need of government intervention. The market can correct itself using flexible prices. The second question is, for classical economists, the demand side policies merely affect. The answer is C, the interest rates and or the price level. Employment is mainly affected by the supply side, and the output is mainly affected by the supply side, and the real wage is mainly affected by the supply side. The third question is, what was the central element of the policy advice from supply-siders like Arthur Laffer? The answer is D, cut tax rates to stimulate the economy. Supply-siders like Arthur Laffer suggest that by reducing tax, then government stimulates the economy. By reducing the tax rates, then the supply of a commodity will increase, and as producers supply more of a commodity, then the amount or the volume of a commodity that is subjected for tax will increase. So by reducing tax, government can increase its revenue or tax again, according to Arthur Laffer. The fourth question is, what is the primary solution proposed by Keynesian economics to combat recession? The answer is B, increasing government spending. Increasing government spending can reduce the problem of recession. According to the Keynesian, recession is mainly caused by deficiency in aggregate demand. So by increasing the aggregate demand, government can stimulate the economy. And this is accomplished by increasing government spending. Students, let's summarize the day's lesson. According to classical thinking, given flexible prices, the short-term fluctuations in economic activity would rather be quick, and they would adjust back to full employment. Neoclassical make use of the concept of marginal utility and accept mathematical economics as one method of presentation. And the focus of the Keynesian economics was on explaining why and offering a policy prescription for minimizing their effects. The monetarist suggests that it is monetary policy and not fiscal policy that addresses the macroeconomic problems. The Neoclassical strongly endorse rational expectations and macro concept of marginal utility and accept mathematical economics as one method of presentation. The focus of Keynesian economics was on explaining why and offering a policy prescription for minimizing their effects. Monetarists suggest that it is monetary policy and not fiscal policy that addresses the macroeconomic policy problems. The Neoclassical strongly endorse rational expectations and macroeconomic relations such as consumption function, the investment function, and the labor market. New Keynesian accepted the rational expectation hypothesis REH, but stressed the existence of nominal rigidities arising from multi-period nominal wage contracts. Students, this is all about the day's lesson. Thank you.